The story of Ethan Carver did not begin with failure. It began with towers of glass, conference rooms lined with polished oak, and news headlines that praised him as one of the sharpest minds of his generation. He had built an empire in Silicon Valley, an empire of codes, networks, and algorithms that reshaped the way people lived their daily lives. For years, Ethan moved through the world untouchable, speaking to presidents, investing in the future of artificial intelligence, and watching his net worth rise into the billions. But every empire, no matter how towering, carries within it the seeds of collapse. For Ethan, that collapse was swift, brutal, and public. It happened quietly at first. Board members whispering about his erratic decisions, old rivals sharpening their knives, waiting for him to falter. A lawsuit that made headlines, claiming his company had violated privacy rights. Then the markets turned, and the investors who once hailed him as a visionary abandoned him overnight. His assets froze in a storm of litigation, and in a matter of months, the billionaire who once owned private jets and mansions was reduced to nothing more than a man with a reputation in ruins. But the true humiliation came not in the boardroom nor in the courtroom. It came on an ordinary morning in Cedar Hollow, Tennessee, a place where no one cared about stock prices or tech innovations. A town tucked between rolling hills and weathered barns, where life was measured in Sunday sermons, Friday night football games, and the sound of cicadas humming at dusk. Ethan had arrived there quietly, far from the chaos of his former life, hoping anonymity would grant him peace. But anonymity had its price. He stood in line at the local grocery store, clutching a basket with bread, milk, and a few cans of soup. To anyone else, it was an unremarkable scene. To Ethan, it was a reckoning. When he handed over his sleek black credit card, the kind reserved for the wealthy elite, the cashier swiped it once, twice, then frowned. "I'm sorry, sir. It's been declined." Her voice was polite but firm, carrying enough volume for the customers in line behind him to hear. A murmur rippled through the small crowd. An older man in overalls chuckled under his breath. A woman whispered to her friend, "That's the fella that bought the old Miller house. Can't even pay for groceries." Ethan's face burned with shame. He tried another card. Declined again. The cashier looked at him with that mixture of pity and irritation, reserved for people who were about to become someone else's problem. It was in that moment, as he fumbled for his dignity, that a voice rose behind him, soft but steady. "I can pay for him." He turned, and there she was. Aisha. No more than 11 or 12, her braids tied neatly with bright beads that clicked softly when she moved. She held out a crumpled envelope. Inside was a small collection of bills and coins, her emergency savings, as she later explained. The money she kept for when her mother's old car broke down, or when her little brother needed medicine. She looked up at Ethan with eyes that held no judgment, no mockery, just quiet resolve. "Please," she said simply, "everyone needs help sometimes." The words pierced through the noise of gossip and laughter. For a man who once commanded rooms of powerful men, who once believed his worth was measured in numbers on a screen, it was the kindness of a child that unraveled him. His throat tightened, his pride screamed for him to refuse, but something deeper, a hollowed part of him that had long hungered for humanity, accepted. The cashier hesitated, then nodded. Aisha placed her small envelope on the counter. The groceries were paid. Ethan walked out of that store with his head low, groceries in hand, but his heart forever marked by that moment. In the days that followed, the memory of Aisha's kindness gnawed at him. He had lived a life insulated by wealth, where charity came in the form of checks signed at galas, where community service meant little more than a tax write-off. But this was different. Here was a child who gave away what little she had, not for recognition, not for praise, but because it was right. Her act forced him to confront a truth he had long avoided. Wealth had never given him belonging. Success had never given him purpose. And now, stripped of both, he stood at a crossroads. Ethan stayed in Cedar Hollow. At first, people whispered about him. the fallen billionaire who had traded skyscrapers for a run-down farmhouse. Some said he was hiding from lawsuits. Others claimed he was planning to buy up the town and turn it into another Silicon Valley. But as weeks turned into months, it became clear Ethan was not there to conquer. He was there to rebuild, though not in the way anyone expected. It began with a playground. A small patch of land behind the old church, where the swings had rusted and the slides sat broken. Ethan asked the pastor for permission to fix it. Skeptical but curious, the pastor agreed. For days, townsfolk watched as the man who once wore tailored suits now wore work gloves, hauling lumber and painting slides in bright colors. A few men joined him, then a few more. When the project was finished, the children of Cedar Hollow had a playground that shone with new life. And for the first time, Ethan heard their laughter echoing in the air, a sound far more valuable than applause in any boardroom. Then came the library, not the grand kind of city skylines, but a modest one, carved out of an abandoned storefront downtown. Ethan bought shelves, books, and furniture with what little remained of his savings. He painted the walls himself, bright blues and yellows, and added murals of famous figures, Maya Angelou, Frederick Douglass, Toni Morrison, figures whose words had shaped generations. Aisha came often, her arms full of borrowed books, her smile lighting the dim space. It was for her, and children like her, that Ethan labored. But not everyone welcomed him. Old adversaries from his past whispered online, fueling rumors that Ethan was using Cedar Hollow as a front to clean up his reputation. Trolls flooded social media, accusing him of seeking pity. Some in the town muttered the same. Men like him don't change, they said. He's just buying his way back into the spotlight. And when a false accusation emerged that Ethan had misused donations he had never even asked for, it seemed the world was eager to believe the worst. Yet through the noise, Aisha's voice remained steady. "Don't listen to them," she told him one evening, sitting cross-legged in the library. "We know the truth. You don't have to prove yourself to people who don't want to see you." Her words anchored him. Slowly, Ethan began to realize that redemption was not about silencing critics, nor about reclaiming glory. It was about the quiet goodness of showing up each day, hammer in hand, paintbrush ready, heart open. The man who once lived for power was now discovering the strength of belonging. Cedar Hollow was not a place where stories stayed secret for long. Every new act of kindness, every misstep, every rumor, good or bad, traveled down Main Street quicker than a summer storm. For Ethan, that meant that every effort he made was scrutinized. Some eyes softened, seeing a man humbled, trying to mend his ways. Others narrowed, unwilling to forgive the arrogance of a billionaire who had once dismissed small towns like theirs as irrelevant. But Ethan stayed. Each morning he woke before sunrise, laced up worn boots, and went to work. Some days he hammered nails into playground fences. Other days he painted murals, bold splashes of color on brick walls that once stood gray and forgotten. The murals became stories in themselves. A mother cradling her child under a canopy of oak trees, children running freely in fields of gold, hands of every shade reaching upward toward the same sky. People slowed their cars to look. Some smiled, some frowned. But no one could deny that the lifeless corners of Cedar Hollow were stirring with new life. One afternoon, as he was painting a mural on the side of a laundromat, Ethan felt a tug on his sleeve. It was Aisha again. She held out a sketch she had made on notebook paper. It showed children standing in front of a rainbow-colored library, their arms outstretched as if welcoming the world. "Maybe you could paint this," she said shyly. Ethan knelt beside her, his throat tightening. For all his millions, once spent on design teams and marketing firms, this single drawing, made with a school pencil, carried more truth than anything he had ever commissioned. He promised her he would. By evening, the sketch was alive on the wall. Aisha stood with her friends, pointing proudly at the colors, while townsfolk gathered quietly behind them. Something shifted that day. People began to see that this was not a man trying to buy redemption with grand gestures. He was listening, learning, and honoring the voices of the very community that had first humbled him. Yet, just as his roots began to settle, the outside world reached in with claws. A popular blog published a piece titled, "From Billionaire to Beggar, Ethan Carver's Redemption Stunt." The article mocked his work, calling it a publicity act to soften the lawsuits still circling him. Cable news anchors chuckled on air, playing footage of him hauling lumber with townsfolk as though it were a comedy sketch. Online forums filled with speculation. He's hiding money offshore. He's trying to launch another company. He's exploiting those people. The weight of it pressed down on him. He had lived through public disgrace before, but this time was different. Back then, he had been accused of betraying shareholders, investors, the faceless crowd of the financial world. Now he feared he might be accused of betraying the people he had come to care for, the children who played on the swings he built, the elderly who borrowed books from his little library, Aisha and her mother, who stopped by often with homemade cornbread as thanks. The breaking point came when a man from his past arrived in Cedar Hollow. Marcus Brandt, once Ethan's fiercest competitor in Silicon Valley, showed up in a polished car with dark windows. He stood in the town square, wearing a tailored suit that looked out of place against the backdrop of weathered storefronts. With cameras rolling, he sneered, "You see? Even here, Ethan Carver is staging another illusion. He can't help himself. He thrives on attention." The confrontation rippled through the town. Some believed Marcus. After all, Ethan had once lived for power, for headlines, for empires. Could a man really change so completely? Others stood quietly by Ethan's side. Their loyalty forged not in words but in the playgrounds, libraries, and murals that now shaped their daily lives. That night, Ethan sat on the porch of the farmhouse he rented, head bowed in his hands. He heard the creak of the steps before he saw her, Aisha, carrying 2 cups of sweet tea her mother had sent. She handed one to him without a word. After a long silence, she finally asked, "Why do you care so much about what they say?" He looked at her, startled by the simplicity of the question. Why did he care? Perhaps because his entire life had been built on the approval of others. Every deal, every headline, every accolade had been his lifeblood. But here, in Cedar Hollow, approval wasn't handed out like trophies. It was earned quietly, through trust, consistency, and humility. "I guess I'm still learning," he admitted softly. Aisha nodded, sipping her tea. "Well, they don't see you like we do. You don't need to be who you were. You just need to be who you are now." Her words settled deep into him. For the first time in years, he felt a strange kind of freedom. The freedom to stop performing, to stop defending, and simply live. The next morning, instead of issuing statements or trying to fight the rumors, Ethan went back to work. He finished painting the mural inspired by Aisha's drawing. He built new shelves in the library. He helped repair a widow's broken porch. And slowly the town began to rally in quiet defiance of the noise outside. Neighbors who had once doubted him began to bring pies, tools, or simply their presence to help with his projects. The act of building became communal, each nail hammered not just by his hands but by theirs. One Sunday, the pastor invited Ethan to speak after service. Ethan declined at first, unwilling to stand before people as though he were giving another polished speech. But the pastor insisted. When Ethan finally stood at the pulpit, the church was silent. He looked at their faces, black, white, young, old, all gathered in one place. "I don't know if I deserve your trust," he began, his voice raw. "I know what the world says about me. And maybe some of it is true. I was a man who lost his way. I thought money meant meaning. I thought success meant belonging. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. What I've learned here is that true wealth is not built in towers or measured in numbers. It's built in the laughter of your children, the kindness of your neighbors, and the dignity of every person who calls this place home. I don't ask for forgiveness. I ask for the chance to keep building something with you. not for you, with you." When he stepped down, the church remained silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, people began to stand, not in applause, but in acknowledgement, in solidarity. It was not a performance, it was a covenant. But redemption, as Ethan would learn, is not a straight path. For every step forward, there were obstacles. Anonymous letters arrived in his mailbox, warning him to leave town. Someone spray-painted fraud across the library's front door, and one evening, as children played in the newly renovated playground, he overheard a man mutter, "Don't trust him. He'll leave when it suits him, just like all men with money do." Those words cut deep, because they carried a shadow of truth. Ethan had left before, left people, left promises, left the wreckage of his empire. Could Cedar Hollow truly trust that he would stay? Could he trust himself not to run when the weight became unbearable? It was Aisha again who grounded him. "You're not the same as before," she said one day as they repainted the library door together. "Back then, you built things for yourself. Now you're building for us. That's the difference." Her certainty steadied him. For the first time, Ethan began to see that his story was no longer about redemption for his past. It was about responsibility to his present. And in that responsibility, he discovered a purpose stronger than any empire he had ever built. By late autumn, Cedar Hollow had changed. The once faded storefronts now wore coats of color, murals breathing stories into brick. The old playground rang with children's laughter again. The small library, though modest, had become a haven, its walls alive with books and conversations, its tables often crowded with school children doing homework or elders quietly reading the newspaper. And though Ethan still carried the scars of his downfall, there was a new steadiness in him, one that came not from power, but from belonging. But peace is fragile, and those who despise change often strike hardest when hope begins to root itself. The false accusations against Ethan returned, louder this time. An article claimed he was misusing community donations, though he had never asked for nor accepted a single dollar. Anonymous voices online said he was using Cedar Hollow as a stage set, a backdrop for some secret scheme. A reporter even arrived in town, camera in hand, trying to provoke townsfolk into confirming the rumors. For many, it stirred painful questions. Had they been fooled? Had they given their trust too easily? One evening, Ethan found himself at the edge of town, staring at the mural he had painted with Aisha's drawing. Under the fading sunset, the children's faces in the painting seemed to look back at him, asking silently if he would stand or break under the weight. It was then that Aisha walked up beside him, carrying her schoolbooks. "They're saying things again," she said softly, her voice carrying more maturity than her years. "But I don't care. I know the truth." Ethan looked at her, this girl whose act of kindness had changed everything. "What if they're right to doubt me?" he asked, his voice low. "What if I'm not the man they believe I am?" Aisha shook her head firmly. "You don't get it, do you? It's not about who you were, it's about who you're choosing to be now. You could leave, but you're still here. That's what matters." Her certainty carried a weight that even the headlines could not. The next day, Ethan called a town meeting. People gathered in the community center, their faces a mix of curiosity, suspicion, and quiet hope. Ethan stood before them, not in a suit, not with a presentation, but in the same worn clothes he worked in every day. "I need to tell you the truth," he began. "I did not come here to rebuild my name. I did not come here to hide. I came here because I had nowhere else to go. When I lost everything, I thought I had lost my life. But then, a little girl in this very town gave me what I needed most. Not money, not pity, but kindness. She gave me her savings so I could buy food. That moment broke me, and it saved me. It reminded me that life is not about empire. It is about people, about community, about dignity. That is why I am here. Not to lead, not to own, just to serve." The room was silent. Some nodded, Others crossed their arms, but the air was heavy with something real, honesty that could not be manufactured. Then, slowly, voices rose from the crowd. A mother stood up. "My children have a place to read because of you." An elderly man spoke next. "You fixed my porch when no one else would." Then another voice. "Our kids have a playground again." One by one, the townsfolk rose, their words weaving together a truth that no outsider could erase. Ethan had become part of them. Not by wealth, not by status, but by the slow, quiet work of showing up day after day. Still, not all wounds healed easily. There were some who refused to trust him, who believed he would eventually leave, who resented his presence. But Ethan no longer lived for universal approval. He had learned to stand firm in the love and support of those who knew him best. As winter set in, Ethan's work continued. He organized coat drives for children in need. He painted another mural on the school's wall, this time with the students' help. He planted trees along the sidewalks, each one marked with a plaque bearing words chosen by the townsfolk: hope, justice, belonging, courage. Through it all, Aisha remained at his side. She read every book in the library twice, sometimes sitting across from him at the table, sketching her ideas for the next mural. Her presence reminded him, daily, that the greatest change often begins with the smallest gesture. And then, in the quiet of a snowy evening, Ethan realized something profound. He no longer thought of himself as the man who lost everything. Instead, he was the man who had finally found what mattered. For the first time in his life, he felt at home. The world outside still mocked him. Internet rumors still flared. Old adversaries still waited for him to stumble. But Cedar Hollow held him steady. The children's laughter, the townsfolk's trust, Aisha's unshakable faith, all these became his fortress. Ethan Carver, once a billionaire tech entrepreneur who measured his life in profits and headlines, had discovered something far greater in a small Tennessee town: the quiet power of kindness, the dignity of community, and the freedom of belonging. In the end, it was not his empire that defined him. It was the little girl who believed in him when no one else did, and the town that gave him a second chance. His story was no longer about redemption from failure. It was about the courage to stay, to build, and to love where he once only conquered. And so, in Cedar Hollow, where the cicadas sang in summer and the church bells rang on Sunday mornings, Ethan found not just survival, but purpose. He had abandoned the hollow pursuit of empire and embraced the quiet goodness of community. Aisha's gift had been small in money, but boundless in meaning. It had planted a seed that grew into a life Ethan could never have imagined, a life rich not in wealth, but in humanity. And for the first time, Ethan Carver was truly home.